Well, we gather again for another thrilling senior project presentation. As you by now very well know, this is the culminating project of the senior year. The seniors work really hard to be ready for this occasion, and they focus on something that is either intriguing or very appealing to them, something that they might follow as a career or they want to just learn about. And in those lines, the story has chosen between the pictures, concocting a comic. Now, Story has been with us since the third grade, and after graduation, she is going to attend Ursinus College in Pennsylvania, and intends to pursue either or both, a little undecided, English and or history. So without further ado, I will leave you with our story, Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Otero, and I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you. I know it's not the most ideal of circumstances. It's not that great to be on a computer. I would much prefer being in front of all of you in person, but we're working with what we've got. So I would like to start my presentation with introducing a quote. Words and pictures are yin and yang. Married, they produce a progeny more interesting than either parent. Dr. Seuss. So, what distinguishes humans from the rest of the animal kingdom? Some people would say maybe it's our ability to empathize, or maybe it's our cognitive ability, our ability to solve problems and create new things. But I disagree. I think that the single most defining factor of our species is our ability to tell stories. And what is a story? Well, it's basically just a telling of events. I could tell you something simple, like I walked down the street and got milk at the grocery store. Sure, it's boring, but it's still a story. And luckily, humans are pretty good at telling stories. So there are some better ones out there. Now, what does that have to do with comics? That is what my presentation is about, right? Well, in the simplest terms, comics is a medium used to express narratives through images. It's simple, right? Images used to tell stories. But it's, oh shoot, this is the wrong one. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Simple, right? But it's actually much more ingrained into our conscious than we think. Humans are hardwired to find patterns and to understand them. So I'll show you this image, for example, and we know exactly what's going on. No need to explain it. Now, a lot of people think that in comics, it is essential to use words, but I disagree. Here's an example of a fantastic comment that requires no words, but as you can still see, you can understand it perfectly. And humans, they've been doing this for thousands of years. This particular image is is 44,000 years old. It was found in a cave in the Indonesian island of Sulawesi. It depicts what are called therianthropes, which are a type of abstract being that combine qualities of both people and animals that was used to communicate narrative fiction of some kind, meaning folklore, religious myths, or spiritual beliefs. So, as people evolved, art evolved, and so did religion. In the 7th century, stained glass became popular, and churches had their stained glass depict biblical stories so that common people could learn by seeing. In a lot of churches, they had, as I said, they had their stories. This one in particular depicts the miracle of Robert of Cricklade, who was a writer in the 11th century. So the first political cartoon was the famous Join or Die. It's attributed to Ben Franklin, and it represents the different colonies as if they were a snake. It became a popular symbol of colonial freedom. Now, most political cartoons that we know today are based off of what are called caricatures. Caricatures is an art technique where a picture description or imitation of a person in which certain striking characteristics are exaggerated in order to create a comic or grotesque effect. So caricatures actually were a fine art in the 16th and 17th century, but the first caricatures that we know of were found in the sketchbooks of Leonardo da Vinci. So, as I said, political cartoons, they've been around for a really long time, and they've had a lot of influence. In the 1800s, illustrated magazines began to appear, and it is in 1843 when the first term cartoon was published. So, as I said, they have a lot of influence. So the idea of the elephant and donkey to represent Republicans and Democrats actually came from a cartoon published in Harper's Weekly by Thomas Nast, and this is it. So the first comics as we know them emerged in the 19th century. Swiss artist Rodolphe Topfer was known as the first comics artist in history, as well as the father of comic strips. So he was the first person to create illustrated books. In 1837, he published Histoire d'M. Vaubois, but in the United States, it was published as The Adventures of Obadiah Oldbuck. Each page of the book had 1 to 6 captioned cartoon panels, which is much like modern comics as we know them today. The most famous European comics that have bled into the Western Hemisphere are those of The Adventures of Tintin, Asterix, and the Moomins. The Adventures of Tintin follows the titular character Tintin, his dog Snowy, and the brash Captain Haddock, as well as a host of other characters as they explore different countries, in the 20th century. Asterix is a French series about a clan of Gauls resisting Roman occupation during the era of Julius Caesar by means of a magic potion that gives them superhuman strength. And The Moomins is a Swedish comic following the family of round, white, hippopotamus-like creatures and their adventures in Moomin Valley. Manga is the Japanese word for comics. It is thought that manga originated from scrolls dating back to the 12th century, which is where the right-to-left reading style originates. During the Edo period, the Tobahon, which is a book of drawings, was published. So the word manga came into common usage with the works such as Santo Kyoden Seiji no Yukikai, published in 1798, and the Hokusai manga books. So skipping ahead to after World War II is when manga as we know it really came to be with the first official manga, Mighty Atom. We know that in the US as Astro Boy. So from here, different genres of manga evolved, and manga became very prominent in Japanese culture. So the first American cartoonist was Richard F. Outcault, creator of The Yellow Kid. So The Yellow Kid was just the adventures of this kid. He lived in the slums, wears a yellow hand-me-down nightshirt. So The Yellow Kid was one of the first Sunday comics. Its geographical location, meaning where the panels are spaced out, had already been long established by political cartoons of the day. But what made Outcault's contribution to comics very important was the introduction of speech balloons or speech bubbles. Sunday comics later became important and established all around the world by the use of the colored printer. So in the 1930s, thin periodicals called comic books appeared. In 1938, Action Comics, part of National Allied Publications, which later became DC Comics, officially kickstarted the golden age of comic books by the release of this, Action Comics #1, Superman. So the golden age of comic books lasted from 1938 to 1956. These are when the first modern comic books were published, and countless superheroes that we know and love today were introduced. Superman, obviously, Batman, Wonder Woman, etc. So since I talked a little bit about the introduction of DC Comics, I want to talk a little bit about the introduction of Marvel Comics. So they were introduced as timely publications in 1939. Their first hits were the Human Torch, anti-hero Namor, the Submariner, and Captain America. But they didn't really achieve as much popular success as DC Comics did. No other character really would until Stanley Lieber, now known as Stan Lee, created and revolutionized superhero comics by introducing heroes for older readers that really appealed to older readers and had much more complex storylines, such as the Fantastic Four and the Amazing Spider-Man. So after World War II, the popularity of comic books began to decline, and comics were subject to a lot of scrutiny by unhappy parents. So much so that the Comics Code Authority was established, which censored and maintained comics' low status throughout the years. In the 1960s, underground comics appeared, which challenged the code with more adult countercultural content. In the 80s, the alternative comics movement was born, which experimented with stories in different genres rather than just the superhero genre. Now, the graphic novel was popularized when Will Eisner published A Contract with God in 1978. After that, graphic novels began appearing, and they were soon accepted by mainstream media and bookstores and libraries. So with the invention of the internet came the ability to publish comics online. This allowed anyone, anywhere to access comics, often for free, and they were soon nicknamed webtoons. And now webtoons can be found anywhere in any type of genre. So before I introduce my comic, I wanted to talk a little about terminology. So in comics, you have a lot of terminology and a lot of specific terms, obviously. So there are captions, speech bubbles, thought bubbles, onomatopoeia, and panels, gutters, and thumbnails. So speech balloons, thought bubbles, those are pretty obvious, when they talk versus when they think. Onomatopoeia is used when a sound is expressed. Here you can see the giant boom there. Popular is whap or smack or anything that you'll see in superhero comics. Panels themselves are the pictures that you see, the little boxes. In the middle of those boxes are what are called gutters. So let's talk about my comic. So my comic process really started with an idea of an aesthetic rather than a real story. I created my character first, and as you can see here, he looked very different from the character I draw today. Thank God. God, this picture is terrible. So as I went through the process of creating and writing my comic, you can see my style changed a lot from this to this. So the comic, I actually wrote the story of my comic during my senior solo. As you can see here, this was the notebook I had with me. I just sat down next to the river, pen in hand, and just scribbled down some ideas to know and to try and figure out what I wanted to write about. I was really inspired by different things. Over the Garden Wall, a short animated series by Cartoon Network, different etchings from 19th century, and my main character Willoughby was inspired by the Scarecrow from Wizard of Oz. I was also very inspired by traditional ghost stories and old wives' tales. And I was very inspired by the Gaelic festival Samhain in order to create my character, Samhain. So the festival Samhain is a festival celebrating the end of the harvest season. It traditionally takes place between October 31st and November 1st, Halloween and Dia de los Muertos. Traditionally, these days have been associated with spirits and the dead, which is why Samhain carries the watch. The watch is kind of sort of meant to represent time itself, and that's kind of why Samhain controls the spirits. So after I had my story, after I had my characters and what I wanted to write about, I put it all down in bullet points, as you can see here. Very messy, just every action that I thought deserved a panel, I put down. And then I got to drawing. So these are some pictures of my first draft, and it was very hard. There's no set rules as to how to create a comic. And so you have to try and figure it out by yourself. So there was a lot of drawing, a lot of erasing, a lot of redrawing, a lot of re-erasing, a lot of redrawing again, a lot of re-erasing again, to try and figure out what panels needed the most emphasis, what sort of poses did I want, what emotions did I want on his face. And after I had all this, I took it to my mentor, Bram Meehan, and he let me know what needed to be changed, what was good, and what I could do better. So after I did that, I began inking it. I took my first draft. As you can see here, I wrote in the margins what needed to change, and then I changed it. I completely redrew this comic, basically from the ground up. And as you can see, the pages changed a little bit, just their formatting. I tried to make my characters more expressive, and I zoomed in on them just so they filled up more of the space. So inking took a long time. It was very stressful, very hard. It was probably the hardest part of this entire process. Because you're taking your page and you're drawing on it, and if you mess up, you have to start all over again. So it was very stressful, but I ended up getting through it. I actually included in the messages here, you'll check, that is a link to my full comic. I did add a little bit of color, but a little bit of blue to outline the spirits and stuff, but it didn't really show up when it was Xeroxed. But I hope you still like it anyway. I really want to give thanks to my mentor, Bram Meehan, for teaching me all about comics and showing me what to do. I also want to thank my parents for always being very supportive, even when I kick them out of the room. Sorry about that. And I want to thank my teachers for always letting me doodle in class. Thanks. And I want to thank my classmates. Nothing about anything would have happened without your guys' support. Any questions? Yes, Buck, you have a question.
How long did it take?
Okay, the entire process took maybe about 3 or 4 months of concentrated work, because yeah, it was a lot.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was also a long time that I spent developing my style. As you saw with the first picture of my character Willoughby that I drew, very different from the rest of my art, and I am very glad that it evolved. Nicoya.
How do I see your comic?
I included a link in chat. If it's not showing up, I can resend it.
I don't see it. I don't know if anyone else sees it, but
Then.
oh, there it is.
There it is.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, no problem. Mr. Wendland.
Great job, Story.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yeah, it's beautiful. I was curious about the origins when you were on your senior solo. Can you go back to that time when you had your journal, a pen, the river, and your inspirations for where you went, how it went, what we never saw in the final product that may have started there, and just how you came to that character, anything.
Yeah, so before I went on my senior solo, I had a rough idea of what I wanted. I knew I wanted it to be sort of fall Halloween themed because at the time that was coming up. I knew I wanted it to be a little bit spooky, but not scary because I don't like scary things. Sorry, my throat is very dry. So I started out with an idea of what I wanted, but I didn't know what concrete that I wanted. What I wanted that was very concrete. Like I didn't know the storyline. I didn't know the resolution. At that time, I honestly had no idea about Sam Hain either. I just, it was just Willoughby, just fall. So that's why I really just sat down with my pen and wrote. And I thought, maybe I'll have a character who's a scarecrow, but is actually not a scarecrow or something, because I was also very influenced by folklore because I love folklore. So that was another big inspiration. Does that answer your question? I know it was kind of.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Mr. Oleg. You're muted.
Sorry.
There you go.
That's gonna echo. Let me mute this. Sorry, we're having technical difficulties here.
Oh, you sound fine now.
Oh, do I? Okay. I was wondering if you could take a moment just to, because you talked about inking. Can you describe what is inking?
So inking is taking the sketch and going over it in a darker marker. I used Sharpie and inking pens just to make the lines darker, just to make it so you can see it better, to make it more stark and contrast.
Okay, so this is what makes the cartoon permanent?
Yeah, from pencil to ink. So for example, here's this, but then I also filled in with a lot more ink later because I wanted it to look like night.
Okay. And can you do it in color also?
Yes, I decided not to do it in color because most of the comics that I have read are not in color. And I wanted it to stay kind of scary. And I felt like doing the stark black versus white contrast kind of gave that more of an image.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mom. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Can you hold up closer to the camera and show Mr. Oleg close up one of the inkings that you did? I don't think that was clear enough.
Oh, okay. Well, you might be able to see it in the back of these, but you can kind of see how it was sketched in pencil originally and how I just went over the line art with a darker marker. One thing I actually learned was that drawings in the forefront need to have thicker lines than drawings in the background, just to, give that appearance of contrast without shading it. Tanya.
Oh, congratulations, sorry, that was super cool. So I was wondering if what was the biggest aha moment that you got for your own life when you are drawing, when you're creating? Like, what was something that you could say wow, I learned this from myself, doing this process?
I think it was actually just my drawings, because before this process, I knew how to do dynamic poses in theory, but I didn't really know how to really give the impression that a character is running or a character, has a lot of emotion on their face. So it was a lot of me learning about my own art skills and what to do to make a page more dynamic. And then once I actually had that, seeing it and making and looking at it and being like, I wrote a comic.
Very good. Thank you.
Anyone else? Miss Barner.
I guess it's not really a question. I just had a comment that it seems like your mentor was just a perfect match for you. Like is it he?
Yes.
Right. So like he was able to really see what you wanted to do and then give you just the right pointers. And it's like really amazing. I especially love that image of him running down the stairs. It's just perfect. So it seems like whatever you guys did in your work together was a perfect fit for you. Do you feel that?
Yeah, I only met with him maybe 3 times in my entire process. One was just, telling him, hi, I'm Story. I want to do a comic for my senior project. And then another was after I had done my first draft, him looking at it and him being like, okay, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to keep.
Working with.
And yeah, another time was in the beginning when I kind of showed him the process of my work. But yeah, he was very, very helpful. He's a comic artist in town. He's actually a professional letterer because oh, there's a little bit of feedback. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah, he's a professional letterer, and in the comic industry, there are different jobs for different things. So there's one person who does the story, one person who does the line art, one person who does the inking, one person who does the coloring, and one person who does the lettering. Mr. Ryan, I think you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Story. I just was looking at your comic, and hopefully someone didn't just ask my question, because it really drew me away from this and into that for a minute, and it was nicely done.
Thank
Really
you.
beautiful. And I'm curious about like the like plot elements and the conflict and did you think about it in terms of kind of like traditional storytelling? Because you definitely have like there's a mystery in the beginning that in the end is solved, but even in the solving of the mystery, there's kind of a bigger mystery appears through the name that you alluded to earlier with Samhain.
Yeah.
It's really an interesting cyclical thing. There's a lot going on there. Did you really think analytically about it, or did it just sort of come out of you? What was the process with that?
Completely thought about it analytically. I wanted it to be mysterious, so thank you for noticing that.
Yeah.
In the beginning, the inspiration for Samhain was the local pagan deities of specific, like English and Western European farmers, because they all believed in these deities that they looked over their farm, and if they did certain sacrifices to them, then they would the next season would be mild or whatnot. And that's kind of the inspiration I got behind Samhain, because I didn't know if anyone would pick up on that, and I didn't want to explain it, because I kind of wanted to make it mysterious.
It worked.
Thank you.
Story.
You're muted, Mom.
Bree.
I was wondering if you think you're gonna make another comic again in the future or not?
I think so. Actually, part of the idea for Samhain and Willoughby and whatever was that it was a 4-story thing, but I decided just to make it 1 story that was much longer than the others, because the other stories were much shorter and I didn't want it to feel a little bit weird. So I just made the 1 story that I showed you guys a bit longer, but it was supposed to go through the seasons. Yeah. Mom, you're on mute right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you tell us what Samhain means?
I did. It's a traditional festival in
Where
the
did it
Gaelic
come from?
tradition.
Where does it come from?
Gaelic tradition. Sorry, do you mean the etymology of it?
Hmm.
I don't actually know that. I should probably look into that. Sorry. Miss Green.
I'm curious if you plan to publish this and try to sell it. That's my first question. Also, I don't know if you said this. Do you have a favorite comic book that you grew up with?
One, I would love to publish it. I wanted to bind it, but obviously because of the whole virus thing, I wasn't really able to.
Yeah.
And comic book, honestly, growing up, I didn't read a lot of comic books. I was a really fast reader, so I always felt like if I got a comic book, I would read it way too fast, and then I would just have it on my bookshelf. So I never bought comic books. So I mostly grew up on the Sunday comics. But some of my favorite comic books now, one is the one I showed you earlier, The Little Trash Maid. It's really funny. It's all online. It's great. Another one is Through the Woods by Katie something. I don't remember. It's called Through the Woods. It's a collection of short stories. Great. I also really liked Calvin and Hobbes.
I was hoping you would say that.
Calvin and Hobbes.
That's my favorite.
Anyone else? Mr. Oleg again.
Yeah. Okay. I have to ask this, but I'm wondering if during this whole process you connected with Ainsley at all.
I have not. No, I haven't spoken with Ainsley since maybe 9th grade.
Hey. Because, I mean, she, of course, loves comics too.
Yeah. No, I haven't. Maybe I should.
All right.
Anyone else? Ms. Colgate.
All right, I'd love to know a little bit more about the story of the story. Especially, I love your opening quote with Zeus, and the yin and the yang. But I also wondered about the process of your refining your story. Was it? Do those ideas come only when you're focused on it, or they come randomly in the middle of class or in the middle of the night too? And how did you decide on the track that you ended up did the story create itself in a way? I just wanted to go, if you go into a little bit more of the storytelling process, pictures aside for a minute.
Yeah, so as I said, I was really inspired by this short animated series called Over the Garden Wall. Highly recommended if you haven't seen it. It is animated, but it is beautifully, beautifully done. So I kind of knew from that I wanted to tell a story. I mean, I've always loved stories. And I kind of knew that I wanted to do something with stories for my senior project, but I kind of went from, doing an academic paper about folklore and whatever to doing this comic book because I wanted to create something of my own. So that was kind of the influence behind wanting to do a comic book. And let's see what else. Definitely the ideas came in the middle of the night. I have an entire sketchbook full of drawings of my main character, and a lot of them are just ideas that I had in the middle of class or in the middle of the night that I was like, oh, I have to scribble this down. As I said, it was supposed to be a quadrilogy. Not really, one book, but with 4 different stories. And a lot of those ideas just came randomly. This was the first and the main idea. Does that answer your question?
I just so enjoyed your whole presentation, and I can't wait to delve into to the comic itself. Like Mr. Ryan, though, I think I would have been totally distracted and missed everything else you said. So right after this is over, go diving. Thank you so much.
The one thing about the PDF of the comic is that it doesn't have the title page on it. I did show the title page in my presentation. It was the painting of Sam Hain I did. Yeah, that's the title page, but it doesn't have any words on it because I was too afraid of ruining the painting.
Well, between Black Dogs and Sam Hain, it's interesting how much British lore has sort of settled around you for the moment. It'll be interesting to see what other inspirations come across your path and future storytelling.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Ms. Colgate. Anyone else? Anything else? Miss Barnard or Buck? Whose ever hand that was.
It's Buck. Sorry.
Okay.
Never mind.
No, say it. Say it.
Never mind.
Sorry, I guess okay, shy.
Yeva, did I see your hand up, or am I just?
It's more of a comment. I just wanted to say that I'm really proud of you, and I think your presentation was amazing.
Thank you so much. Your presentation was amazing as well. It was fantastic. Okay. Anyone else? If Buck doesn't want to go, then thank you all for coming.
Yes, you are class. I told you, it's the same.